Welcome, emergency management planners and disaster analysts, to this explainer. Okay, let's jump straight into it. Today, we're doing a high-stakes clinical threat assessment on pretty much the single most consequential structure on Earth, the Three Gorges Dam. We are stripping away all the hype and hyperbole to look strictly at what the numbers, the logistics, and the raw physics actually tell us about a catastrophic failure. Our whole guiding principle for this briefing is really straightforward. Let me walk you through the first 60 minutes. Not speculation, physics. We're going to map out exactly what happens in the first hour following a structural collapse, treating this as a serious, no-nonsense contingency analysis for basically one of the most complex emergency management scenarios you could ever imagine.
So here is our operational agenda. We'll be covering threat parameters, the breach, the Yichang impact, the expanding flood, the energy scale, and finally, total exposure. We are literally mapping destruction directly against human reaction time.
Okay, kicking things off with Section 1, Threat Parameters.
Before we can even talk about emergency response, we've got to understand the baseline scale of this dam, right? We are talking about 39.3 cubic kilometers. That is 39.3 trillion liters of water sitting 175 meters up in the air. To kind of put that into perspective for you, imagine taking the entire volume of the Great Salt Lake and just suspending it above a continent. If this containment fails, we're looking at the largest single event release of water in all of recorded human history. So yeah, that is the baseline threat we're planning against.
So what actually initiates this? Well, potential trigger scenarios include a magnitude 6.0 plus earthquake, a massive landslide generating an overtopping wave, a direct military strike, or just progressive structural failure over time. But honestly, regardless of the trigger, once that integrity is compromised, the physics simply take over.
Right, moving on to Section 2, the breach. This covers minute 0 to minute 5. You know, a massive concrete gravity dam like the Three Gorges doesn't just vanish in a split second. It breaches. A section gives way, and the water starts to rapidly erode the broken edges. The immediate nightmare for planners is the sheer vertical drop. The reservoir sits at 175 meters, but the river below is way down at 65 meters. That creates a massive 110-meter head pushing all that water out. Because of that immense pressure, you're looking at initial breach velocities of 70 to 100 kilometers per hour. In literally just the first 5 minutes, billions of liters escape. The roar of that water would be heard tens of kilometers away, and the impact hitting the riverbed would absolutely shake the ground.
And that brings us to Section 3, the Yichang impact, which spans minutes 5 to 30.
Let's look at this timeline. Minute 0, the initial breach occurs. By minute 5, a massive wall of water has fully formed and is propagating downstream. And by minute 30, that flood impacts Yichang. Yichang is just 40 kilometers downstream. This is a terrifyingly compressed window for survival.
For emergency managers, the reality here is just brutal. For a city of 4 million people, 30 minutes is not an evacuation, it's a scramble. Think about the logistics for a second. Even with instantaneous warning, moving 4 million people in under half an hour to high ground, it's basically impossible.
And you might be wondering, couldn't people just shelter in place? Actually, no way. We are not talking about clean floodwater slowly rising. We are comparing clean floodwater to highly destructive debris-laden water. This wave is carrying massive chunks of concrete, reservoir sediment, and giant rocks. Standard urban buildings are simply not designed to survive that kind of lateral water loading, especially when they're getting battered by high-speed debris. The structural impact goes from potentially survivable in a normal flood to utterly devastating. Virtually every non-specifically designed structure in its path would be completely wiped out.
Let's move to Section 4, the expanding flood, covering minutes 30 to 60.
As the flood blasts past Yichang, the whole terrain changes. The river gorge opens up into the flat Zhenghan Plain, which is this major agricultural and population hub. First, the flood enters the Zhenghan Plain. Second, the water spreads laterally across tens of kilometers. And third, it rapidly approaches Yangtze. The wave slows down a bit, sure, but it expands enormously in width. It goes from a tight torrent to this massive muddy wave, drowning agricultural land, whole villages, and critical infrastructure, all within the very first hour. Now, Chinese contingency planning does account for downstream flood diversion areas, like the Shaxi diversion area. Officials state that waters reaching Shaxi, which is about 340 kilometers downstream, would be channeled out to help. But look at this huge mismatch. The Shaxi diversion area takes 48 hours to meaningfully reduce water levels. 2 full days. The violent speed of the destruction versus that painfully slow mitigation timeline is an absolute nightmare for planners. And keep in mind, Shashi is less than a quarter of the way to Shanghai.
All right, Section 5, the energy scale. To really grasp the sheer power we're dealing with, look at this staggering comparison. The potential energy of all that water dropping is about 46 terajoules. That equates to roughly 11 kilotons of TNT. To put that into perspective, the Hiroshima atomic bomb was about 15 kilotons. So we're talking about an energy output in the exact same order of magnitude as a nuclear weapon. But here is the massive difference for emergency response. The Hiroshima bomb released 15 kilotons as an instantaneous blast in a limited area. The Three Gorges Dam break releases 11 kilotons of energy as sustained flooding over hours and across hundreds of kilometers. It requires a completely different, totally sustained operational response. Which finally brings us to Section 6, total exposure. Let's project this timeline outward beyond that first hour to look at the macro-level systemic collapse. The emergency management nightmare really shifts geographically here. At 24 hours, the massive, slower-moving inundation hits the 11 million people of Wuhan, 700 kilometers away. At 3 days, the sustained rise in river levels overwhelms Nanjing 1,200 kilometers downstream, basically blowing past defenses built only for regular monsoons. And at 2 weeks, that prolonged surge hits Shanghai, flooding the delta and its 26 million residents 1,600 kilometers away. And that leads us straight to this mind-boggling number, 400 million. That is the approximate population living along the Yangtze plain between the dam and the sea. Basically, every major city, rail line, and road follows this river valley. Between the direct flooding, the compounding infrastructure destruction, contaminated water, and shattered supply chains, this would literally be the largest single disaster event affecting human population in history. Now let's take a breath. The honest take here, the Three Gorges Dam is a highly over-engineered gravity dam. It's built on solid granite, it's been continuously monitored for 20 years, and there is an extremely low probability of failure.
But here's the thing. The physics are known. The population is counted. Only the probability is uncertain. When the potential impact is measured in hundreds of millions of lives, even a microscopic probability demands this kind of serious contingency analysis. The math on what happens if it breaks is absolutely undisputed.
So I'm going to leave you with this question. Does this physics-based reconstruction change your risk assessment? Does seeing the raw data of these first 60 minutes alter how you view the single most consequential structure on Earth? I really want to hear what you all think as planners and analysts, so drop your thoughts in the comments below. And hey, make sure you subscribe, because in our next explainer, we're going to map out exactly who is most at risk by diving into the downstream mortality geography. We'll see you there.